Can a simple tax on imported goods change the course of history, fuel trade wars, or even save economies? Tariffs aren't just economic tools, they're powerful weapons in economics. Today we go all out to talk about the power inherent in tariffs. Tariffs have been around for centuries, acting as one of the oldest tools in the economic playbook. At their core, tariffs are taxes placed on goods imported from other countries. The idea sounds simple. If you make foreign products more expensive, people will buy more local goods. But in reality, tariffs are much more complex. They can start trade wars, shift economies, and even change political landscapes. Yet, despite all the controversy surrounding them, there have been moments in history when tariffs didn't just cause chaos, they actually worked. To understand how tariffs have achieved their goals, it's important to first recognize what those goals usually are. Governments don't just slap tariffs on products for fun. They use them to protect local industries, create jobs, balance trade deficits, or even as bargaining chips in international negotiations. When tariffs succeed, they often do so in ways that ripple far beyond just making one product more expensive. After the War of 1812, the United States found itself in a tricky situation. British goods, especially textiles, were flooding American markets. British manufacturers, with their advanced factories and cheaper production costs, could sell products at prices that American businesses simply couldn't compete with. This threatened to crush the young nation's budding industries before they had a chance to grow. Enter the Tariff of 1816. This was America's first protective tariff, designed not just to raise money for the government, but to shield U.S. manufacturers from overwhelming British competition. The tariff placed a tax on imported goods, especially textiles, making British products more expensive than locally made ones. This move gave American factories the breathing room they needed to develop. In this case, the tariff did exactly what it was supposed to do: protect emerging industries, allowing them to grow strong enough to compete on their own. Without it, American manufacturing might have struggled to get off the ground. In the 1960s, an unexpected trade war broke out, not over oil, steel, or electronics, but chicken. Yes, chicken. American poultry farmers had become extremely efficient, exporting large amounts of cheap chicken to Europe, especially West Germany and France. European farmers couldn't compete, so their governments slapped high tariffs on U.S. chicken imports. In response, President Lyndon B. Johnson imposed a 25% tariff on light trucks imported from Europe, targeting German automakers like Volkswagen. The result? European light truck exports to the U.S. plummeted, giving American automakers like Ford and General Motors a huge advantage in the growing pickup truck market. What's even more interesting is that the chicken tax is still in effect today, and it's one of the reasons why trucks like the Ford F-150 dominate the U.S. market. While it started as a quirky retaliation in a trade dispute over chicken, the tariff ended up reshaping the American auto industry in ways that still matter decades later. More recently, tariffs have played a key role in the ongoing trade tensions between the United States and China. In 2018, the U.S. imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, citing national security concerns. The goal was clear: protect American steel producers from cheaper foreign competition, particularly from China, which had been accused of flooding the global market with low-cost steel. The tariffs led to mixed reactions. Some U.S. manufacturers, especially in the steel industry, benefited from reduced foreign competition. Companies reopened plants, hired workers, and even expanded operations. For example, U.S. Steel announced plans to restart production at facilities that had been idle for years. However, the tariffs also raised costs for American companies that rely on steel to make products, from cars to construction equipment. This created a ripple effect, with some businesses facing higher expenses and passing those costs on to consumers. But if we focus solely on the primary objective, reviving the U.S. steel industry, the tariffs achieved measurable success, at least in the short term. What do these examples teach us? First, tariffs can work, but their success often depends on clearly defined goals. Whether it's protecting a fledgling industry, retaliating in a trade dispute, or preserving cultural heritage, tariffs have proven effective in specific situations. However, success doesn't always mean perfect. Tariffs can create winners and losers. They might boost one part of the economy while hurting another. The key is understanding that tariffs are like surgical tools. They need to be used carefully, with precision, and for the right reasons. Know someone who loves economics or politics? Share this video. Don't forget to like and hit the bell notification to be updated for the next video. The hidden costs: how tariffs ripple through supply chains and consumer prices. When people hear the word tariff, they often think of taxes on imported goods, government strategies, or political battles between countries. But what most don't realize is that tariffs aren't just about governments and international trade. They hit closer to home than you'd expect. Every time you buy a phone, a pair of sneakers, a car, or even a bag of chips, tariffs might be quietly influencing the price you pay. The effects don't just stop at the border. They ripple through supply chains, shift business decisions, and land directly in the wallets of everyday consumers. Understanding the hidden costs of tariffs starts with knowing how deeply connected the world's economy really is. Today, almost everything we use comes from complex supply chains that stretch across countries and continents. A smartphone, for example, isn't just made in China or assembled in the USA. Its parts, processors, screens, batteries, and software come from different countries like South Korea, Japan, the US, and others. Tariffs don't just affect the final product, they impact every single link in that chain. Imagine a giant domino setup. The first domino represents raw materials like steel, aluminum, or microchips. The next domino is the manufacturer that turns those materials into parts. After that comes the assembly plant, then the shipping company, the retailer, and finally, you, the buyer. When a tariff is placed on one part of this chain, it's like knocking over the first domino. The effects cascade down the line, impacting every stage of production and distribution. Many people think tariffs are paid by foreign companies trying to sell their products in another country. In reality, it's the importing company, the business that brings those goods into the country, that pays the tariff. And guess what? Businesses don't like losing money, so they usually pass those extra costs onto the next person in line, the consumer. Consider the case of sneakers. The US has had tariffs on imported footwear for decades, with some reaching as high as 37.5%. Brands like Nike and Adidas don't just eat that cost. Instead, they factor it into the price tag you see at the store. A sneaker that could have cost $80 might end up priced at $100 simply because of the added tariff. And it's not just luxury items. Everyday essentials like clothing, food, and electronics can be affected. For example, when the US placed tariffs on steel and aluminum in 2018, it didn't just hurt foreign metal producers. The cost of canned goods like soup and soda also went up because the cans themselves became more expensive to produce. Even construction costs rose since builders rely on steel for everything from skyscrapers to bridges. While big corporations can sometimes absorb tariff costs or negotiate better deals with suppliers, small businesses often don't have that luxury. They operate on tighter budgets and slimmer profit margins, making them more vulnerable to sudden price hikes. One of the biggest arguments in favor of tariffs is that they protect domestic jobs. The logic is simple. If foreign goods are more expensive, people will buy more local products, which creates jobs at home. While this can be true in some industries, the hidden cost is often job losses in other sectors. Let's go back to the steel tariffs of 2018. Yes, they helped some American steelworkers because domestic steel production got a boost. But companies that rely on steel, like car manufacturers, construction firms, and appliance makers, suddenly faced higher costs. To stay profitable, many of these companies had to cut jobs. A study by the Trade Partnership, a research firm, estimated that while the tariffs protected about 16,000 steel jobs, they caused the loss of over 400,000 jobs in industries that depended on steel. That's a staggering trade-off. It's like saving one small town's factory at the cost of shutting down businesses across an entire state. Tariffs don't exist in a vacuum. When one country imposes tariffs, the targeted country often responds with its own tariffs, a move known as retaliation. This can quickly escalate into a trade war, where both sides keep raising tariffs on each other's goods. For global supply chains, this is a nightmare. Companies that rely on materials or products from multiple countries suddenly face unpredictable costs. Take the example of the U.S. China trade war again. China responded to U.S. tariffs by imposing its own on American products like soybeans, pork, and cars. This devastated American farmers, who lost access to one of their biggest export markets. Farmers who had nothing to do with international politics found themselves caught in the crossfire. Many had to rely on government bailouts just to survive. While the immediate effects of tariffs are often visible, higher prices, disrupted supply chains, the long-term consequences can be even more damaging. Tariffs can make economies less efficient by protecting industries that might not be competitive on a global scale. This discourages innovation because companies don't feel as much pressure to improve when they're shielded from foreign competition. It's clear that tariffs aren't just simple taxes on foreign goods. They're double-edged swords that can protect domestic industries while quietly draining other parts of the economy. But that doesn't mean tariffs are always bad. Sometimes they're necessary tools for strategic reasons, like protecting national security or negotiating better trade deals. The key is using them wisely, understanding that every tariff sets in motion a chain reaction that touches businesses, workers, and consumers alike. Competition is often the spark that ignites innovation. When companies face strong competitors, whether at home or from abroad, they're forced to find ways to stand out. They invest in research and development, improve their products, and streamline their operations to lower costs. This is how industries grow stronger, not just survive. Consider the technology sector. Unlike industries that rely heavily on tariffs for protection, tech companies operate in a highly competitive, fast-moving global market. Companies like Apple, Samsung, and Google are constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible because they know that if they don't innovate, someone else will. There's no safety net of tariffs to protect them from global competition. Instead, they rely on creativity, efficiency, and the ability to adapt. In fact, some of the most successful industries in the world thrive precisely because they face tough competition. The German automotive industry, for example, is known for producing high-quality cars like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Audi. Germany doesn't rely heavily on tariffs to protect its car makers. Instead, these companies compete globally by focusing on innovation, engineering excellence, and cutting-edge technology. While it's true that tariffs can sometimes slow down innovation, there are exceptions where they've actually encouraged it. This usually happens when tariffs are part of a broader strategy to develop new industries or technologies. One notable example is South Korea in the 1960s and 70s. At the time, South Korea was a developing country with a weak industrial base. The government used tariffs and other trade barriers to protect young industries like steel, shipbuilding, and electronics. But here's the key difference. The protection wasn't permanent. The government also invested heavily in education, infrastructure, and technology development. Companies like Samsung and Hyundai were expected to become globally competitive, and the tariffs were gradually removed as these industries matured. This approach worked because the tariffs were temporary and part of a larger plan to foster growth and innovation. It's a delicate balance. Too much protection can create complacency, but strategic use of tariffs, combined with investment in innovation, can help new industries get off the ground. Another factor to consider is how tariffs affect industries that rely on global supply chains. In today's interconnected world, very few products are made entirely in one country. A single smartphone, for example, might have parts from a dozen different countries. Tariffs on any part of that supply chain can disrupt production and increase costs, making it harder for companies to stay competitive. For industries like electronics, automotive, and aerospace, access to affordable, high-quality components from around the world is crucial. Tariffs can create bottlenecks, force companies to find new suppliers, or even relocate production to other countries. This can slow down innovation because businesses have to spend time and money navigating trade barriers instead of focusing on research and development. A more recent example of how tariffs affect domestic industries comes from the solar energy sector. In 2018, the U.S. imposed tariffs on imported solar panels to protect American manufacturers. The goal was to boost domestic production and create jobs. In the short term, some U.S. solar panel manufacturers benefited as they faced less competition from cheaper Chinese imports. However, the tariffs also made solar panels more expensive for American consumers and businesses. This slowed the growth of the solar industry overall, leading to fewer solar installations and job losses in areas like installation, maintenance, and project development, sectors that employ far more people than panel manufacturing. So do tariffs help or hurt domestic industries? The answer isn't simple. Tariffs can provide short-term protection, giving companies time to adjust to new challenges. But if they're used too long or without a clear strategy, they can stifle innovation, create inefficiencies, and make industries less competitive on the global stage. Beyond economics, the political and diplomatic impact of tariff policies. When people talk about tariffs, the conversation often focuses on money, how much things cost, who profits, and which industries win or lose. But tariffs aren't just about economics. They're powerful political tools that shape relationships between countries, influence global alliances, and even spark conflicts. In fact, behind every tariff decision is a complex web of diplomacy, national interests, and strategic goals that stretch far beyond supply chains and price tags. At their core, tariffs are taxes placed on imported goods. But when governments decide to impose or remove these taxes, they're sending signals to other nations. Sometimes tariffs are used to protect domestic industries. Other times, they're a form of leverage in political negotiations. And in extreme cases, they've even been a trigger for international tensions, trade wars, and diplomatic standoffs. Understanding the political and diplomatic side of tariffs helps us see why countries make certain decisions, even when those choices seem risky or unpopular. It's not just about protecting jobs or boosting the economy. It's about power, influence, and control in an interconnected world. One of the clearest examples of tariffs being used as a political weapon comes from recent history, the U.S. China trade war that began in 2018. The U.S. government, under President Donald Trump, imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. The official reason? To address unfair trade practices, such as intellectual property theft, and the massive trade imbalance between the two countries. But beneath the surface, it was also about asserting political dominance. China responded with its own set of tariffs on American products like soybeans, cars, and whiskey, targeting industries that supported Trump's political base. This back and forth wasn't just about economics, it was a strategic chess game. The tariffs were designed to apply pressure, forcing both countries to the negotiating table. In the end, the trade war reshaped diplomatic relations between the world's two largest economies, leading to new trade agreements, but also creating lasting tension. Tariffs don't always lead to conflict. In many cases, they're used as bargaining chips in diplomatic negotiations. When countries disagree on issues like trade rules, environmental policies, or human rights, tariffs can serve as a way to apply pressure without resorting to more extreme measures, like sanctions or military action. For example, in 2019, the U.S. threatened to impose tariffs on Mexican goods unless Mexico took stronger action to curb illegal immigration across the U.S.-Mexico border. This wasn't about protecting American industries. It was a political move designed to influence another country's behavior. Faced with the economic threat, Mexico agreed to deploy more troops to its southern border and implement stricter immigration controls. The tariffs were never fully enforced because the political goal had been achieved. Tariffs are also central to trade agreements, where countries negotiate to reduce or eliminate these taxes in exchange for better access to each other's markets. Agreements like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and its successor, the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, involved years of diplomatic talks where tariffs played a key role. The negotiation process often includes threats of new tariffs if countries can't reach a deal, creating both tension and opportunities for compromise. While tariffs are often seen as hard-edged tools of economic pressure, they can also be used to project soft power, subtle influence that shapes global perceptions without direct confrontation. Countries sometimes adjust their tariff policies to strengthen alliances, reward friendly nations, or promote shared values. Consider the European Union, EU, which uses tariff policies to promote environmental sustainability. The EU has proposed a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which would impose tariffs on imports from countries with weaker environmental regulations. The goal isn't just economic, it's about encouraging other nations to adopt greener practices. By leveraging tariffs, the EU can push for global climate action without relying solely on diplomatic talks or international agreements. Similarly, the U.S. has historically provided tariff exemptions to countries it considers strategic allies. These exemptions are often part of broader foreign policy strategies. For example, after World War II, the U.S. helped rebuild the economies of Japan and Western Europe by lowering tariffs and promoting free trade. This wasn't just about economics, it was a way to strengthen alliances during the Cold War, countering the influence of the Soviet Union. In some cases, tariffs are justified not just for economic reasons, but for national security. This argument is often controversial because it blurs the line between trade policy and defense strategy. Governments claim that certain industries, like steel, energy, or technology, are vital to national security, and protecting them with tariffs is necessary to maintain independence and preparedness. In 2018, the U.S. imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, citing national security concerns. The government argued that relying too heavily on foreign metals could weaken the U.S. defense industry. Critics, however, saw this as a stretch, suggesting that the real motive was economic protectionism. The move sparked diplomatic disputes with key allies, including Canada, the European Union, and South Korea, who argued that they posed no security threat to the U.S. One of the most significant diplomatic risks of tariffs is the potential for escalation. When one country imposes tariffs, the targeted country often retaliates with its own tariffs. This tit-for-tat approach can spiral into full-blown trade wars, where both sides suffer economic damage and diplomatic ties weaken. Trade wars don't just affect the countries directly involved, they create ripple effects across the global economy. Supply chains are disrupted, prices rise, and smaller countries that depend on stable trade relationships get caught in the crossfire. The uncertainty caused by trade wars can also shake global markets, affecting everything from stock prices to currency values. While tariffs are often viewed through an international lens, they're also deeply connected to domestic politics. Leaders use tariff policies to appeal to voters, support key industries, and fulfill campaign promises. In democratic countries, public opinion can play a big role in shaping trade policy. For instance, politicians might impose tariffs to protect jobs in regions where industries are struggling. This can be a powerful message during elections, as it shows voters that their leaders are taking action to defend local economies. However, the long-term consequences of these decisions, such as higher consumer prices or strained international relationships, are often less visible to the public. In some cases, tariffs become symbols of national pride or economic independence. They're framed as bold moves to stand up against unfair treatment by other countries. This kind of rhetoric can rally political support, even if the economic impact is mixed. Managing tariff policies is like walking a tightrope. On one side, tariffs can protect industries, create leverage in negotiations, and promote national interests. On the other side, they can damage diplomatic relationships, spark trade wars, and hurt the very economies they're meant to support. Globalization has made economies so intertwined that slapping a flat tax on foreign products can cause unexpected consequences, not just for the countries involved, but for entire industries and supply chains worldwide. This is where the idea of smart tariffs comes into play. Unlike old-school tariffs, smart tariffs are designed with precision, targeting specific products, industries, or even political goals without causing unnecessary damage to the global economy. In the past, tariffs were used like sledgehammers, big, heavy, and designed to make an impact. Governments would impose high taxes on all goods from a certain country to protect their local industries or punish rivals. But as trade became more complex, this approach started causing more harm than good. Modern economies need tools that are more like surgical instruments, precise, flexible, and adaptable. A smart approach is value-added tariffs, which focus on the specific parts of a product's value chain. For example, if a country wants to discourage reliance on foreign-made computer chips, but still needs other electronic components, it might impose tariffs only on the chips, not the finished products. This pushes companies to find alternative suppliers or invest in domestic production for that specific component without disrupting entire industries. One of the most innovative trends in modern tariff policy is the use of dynamic tariffs, tariffs that adjust automatically based on economic conditions. Think of it like surge pricing in ride-sharing apps. When demand is high or there's a supply shortage, the price goes up. Similarly, dynamic tariffs can increase or decrease depending on factors like trade balances, currency fluctuations, or market disruptions. While traditional tariffs focus on economic protection, modern smart tariffs often aim to achieve broader goals, like environmental sustainability or social justice. These are sometimes called ethical tariffs or green tariffs. One example is the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CAM, a groundbreaking policy designed to fight climate change. The idea is simple. If European companies have to pay for carbon emissions under strict environmental laws, it's unfair for them to compete with foreign companies that don't face the same costs. CBAM imposes tariffs on imports from countries with weaker climate regulations, leveling the playing field and encouraging global efforts to reduce carbon emissions. Similarly, some countries use tariffs to promote human rights. For instance, the U.S. has imposed tariffs on products linked to forced labor or child labor in certain regions. By making these goods more expensive, the tariffs discourage unethical practices and pressure foreign governments to improve labor conditions. As the world becomes more digital, smart tariffs are evolving to address new challenges in the online economy. Digital tariffs focus on products and services that exist in the virtual world, like software, streaming services, and even cryptocurrencies. While smart tariffs are designed to protect national interests, they also play a role in fostering global cooperation. In fact, many modern tariffs are part of broader trade agreements that encourage countries to work together rather than compete aggressively. Consider the World Trade Organization, WTO, which sets rules for global trade and helps resolve disputes between countries. WTO agreements often include provisions that limit the use of traditional protectionist tariffs, but allow for smart, targeted measures when justified. This system helps maintain a balance between free trade and the right of nations to protect their economies. Despite their advantages, smart tariffs aren't perfect. Complexities exist. Unintended consequences is also a possibility. Smart tariffs represent the next generation of trade policy, flexible, data-driven, and designed for a globalized world. They go beyond simple taxes on imports, acting as tools for economic protection, political leverage, environmental action, and even social justice. That's it for today, peeps. If this blew your mind, hit that like button and let us know you're watching. Want more content that breaks down big ideas like tariffs? Subscribe now. Thanks for watching.